We're live from New Delhi. You're watching DD India News, India's voice to the world. I'm Lipakshi Khurana. Coming up in the next hour. Benjamin Netanyahu says Israeli forces operating inside Gaza City, warns Lebanon's Hezbollah against escalating conflict. Uncertainty grips Bangladesh as another 48-hour nationwide blockade begins today, demanding fresh polls in the country. India to host annual bilateral 2+2 Ministerial Dialogue in New Delhi on November 9th and 10th. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin to attend. And in Cricket World Cup, Glenn Maxwell's Herculean doubles 100 seals Australia's 3-wicket win and a semi-final berth. In details, in an attempt to neutralize terrorism in Gaza, Israeli forces are now fighting off Hamas at its own home. In a video address on Tuesday, Prime Minister Netanyahu said that their forces are operating from inside Gaza as it pressed on with a month-long offensive against Hamas. Netanyahu also warned Hezbollah to rethink before choosing sides with Hamas. Israel launched a counter-offensive against Hamas after the terrorist group attacked southern Israel on October 7th, killing 1,400 people and seized several hostages.
Gaza City is encircled. We are operating inside it. We are increasing pressure on Hamas every hour, every day. We have killed thousands of terrorists above ground and below ground. If Hezbollah chooses to join the war, it'd be making a big mistake. No ceasefire without the release of our hostages.
Earlier, top Israeli army commander also said that Israeli Defense Forces troops were operating in the heart of Gaza City for the first time in decades.
For the first time in decades, the Israeli Defense Forces are fighting in the heart of Gaza City, at the heart of terrorism. This is a complex and difficult war, and to show my sorrow, it also comes at a price.
And as Israel combats Hamas, Yemen's Houthis group claimed to have launched drones against the Jewish state. The group also said that it has launched a new batch of drones against sensitive targets inside Israel. Iran-backed Houthis have rallied behind the Palestinians since Hamas attacked Israel. Houthis military spokesperson has also blamed Israel for instability in the Middle East, saying the circle of conflict in the region was being expanded by its continued crimes. He further said that the Houthis would continue to mount attacks until the Israeli aggression stops. And amid the Israel-Hamas conflict, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk is visiting West Asia. The UN High Commissioner will visit Rafah border today. Earlier during his Cairo visit, the UN High Commissioner said a solution to end the violence in Gaza is really important. Turk is in the region to engage with government officials, civil society actors, victims and UN colleagues on the human rights situation in the region. He will be traveling to Amman on Thursday.
It's the 1-month anniversary of this incredible escalation of violence that we have seen. I'm, of course, from a human rights perspective, extremely worried about the situation, about what is happening, and it is really important that a solution is found to end the violence and to get out of this horrible, horrible humanitarian and human rights situation for what's happening in Gaza.
And the UN World Health Organization has reiterated the urgent need for a humanitarian pause to ease the suffering across Gaza. Briefing reporters at the United Nations in Geneva, WHO spokesperson urged unhindered and safe access to deliver essential supplies to those in need.
Access is necessary, and that is to be done through air, not through air, but through road. This way we can bring in the supplies. We have the supplies The whole UN has the supplies outside of Gaza at the south and the Rafah crossing from Al Arish onwards. The supplies route, the logistics is taken care of.
Also, satellite images released by Maxwell Technologies on Tuesday revealed aid trucks queuing at Egypt's Rafah border crossing with Gaza. Numerous large vehicles can be seen gathered on the Egyptian side of the border as residents of Gaza continue to face shortages of food, medicine and fuel. And the number of evacuees leaving the Gaza Strip through Egypt rose on Tuesday, a day after the Rafah border crossing was reopened. At least 500 people, most of them foreigners or dual nationals, and their dependents passed through Rafah, the only crossing that does not border Israel. Also, Israelis in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv marked 1 month since the devastating attacks by Hamas militants. Hundreds of people gathered outside Israel's parliament in Knesset in Jerusalem on Tuesday evening to pay tributes to the victims of October 7th attack. In central Tel Aviv, dozens gathered around a makeshift memorial to light the candles. Another prayer service was held at Jerusalem. Dozens of Israelis gathered along the Western Wall to hold prayers for the safe return of hostages being held by Hamas. People also paid tribute to those killed in October 7th attack. Well-wishers and family members of victims prayed for the Adi Feldman Galgut, whose aunt and uncle are among the hostages, said she came to pray at the most holiest place on earth for the safe return of her loved ones. Hamas militants stormed through Israeli communities near the Gaza Strip on October 7th, killing 1,400 people, taking more than 200 hostages and sparking Israeli military action, which has cost 10,000 lives in the enclave, according to the Palestinian authorities. 30 teddy bears were exhibited in the centric Buenos Aires obelisk to symbolize the underaged hostages of Hamas in Israel. The protest is part of the international campaign Kidnaps Brings Them Back Home, which started on Monday in the Argentinian capital. Well, exactly a month ago, the Hamas had run rampage through large parts of Israel, killing and abducting civilians. A month later, as the entire nation observed a moment's silence, Israel's forces have not only encircled its main hideout, Gaza City, planning a crippling onslaught against it. It has also laid bare the Hamas's underground network of tunnels, an essential element of its shoot and scoot tactics in the battle zone. Our report.
The Israel-Hamas armed conflict has now entered day 32. But even after a month of intense fighting, the conflict rages on with no end in sight. A video released by the Israeli Defense Forces on Tuesday shows the destruction of a tunnel in Gaza, which they said was a Hamas structure. Israel says its forces have surrounded Gaza City, home to a third of the enclave's 2.3 million people, and are poised to attack it soon in their campaign to annihilate the Hamas Islamists who attacked Israeli towns exactly a month ago. A moment of silence was held across Israel and beyond on Tuesday to commemorate the victims of the Hamas October 7th attacks on Israel and the hostages still held in Gaza. She is Niva Venkat. Her son Omer is among the abducted.
I'm waiting for them, for my son, and I think there is no way that is not a good way. Every way, in my opinion, is a good way to bring them back, to bring my Omer to his bed, to his family, to his life, to give all the children and the old people again to be freedom. It's unbelievable.
Diplomatic efforts to contain the conflict are also on. Israeli Foreign Minister and new US Ambassador to Israel held their first official meeting on Tuesday. They discussed efforts to obtain the release of the Hamas-held hostages in Gaza, maintaining regional peace, and the continued fight against Iran and its proxies. Mihir Makri reporting for DD India.
And now to updates on Russia-Ukraine war now. A Russian-installed official in the eastern region of Ukraine said 6 people were killed in shelling in Donetsk by Ukrainian forces. The Russian-appointed head of the region, Denis Pushlin, said 11 more people were wounded in the incident as per the preliminary data. While Ukrainian artillery soldiers fired rockets from makeshift Grad launchers at the front line in Zaporizhzhia region on Tuesday. The army unit has equipped pickup trucks with rocket launch pipes from Soviet-era Grad systems, claiming that this makeshift system offers greater mobility and flexibility than conventional launchers. Ukraine has retaken a few small villages in the southeastern Zaporizhzhia region, but the progress has been small. Also, a presidential decree said Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has proposed extending an export ban on Ukrainian natural gas for the whole of 2024. The decree urges Ukraine's government to enhance its gas transmission system capacity to ensure natural gas import and storage in underground facilities. Earlier, Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal said Ukraine was ready to provide foreign energy traders with up to half of its underground gas storage capacity of 30 billion cubic meters. The largest state-owned gas producer, Naftogaz, said the country intended to increase gas production into 2023 to 19.1 billion cubic meters. Also, the U.S. Army needs Congress to approve $3.1 billion to buy 155mm artillery rounds and expand production to quickly replace stocks depleted by shipments to Ukraine and now Israel. The U.S. and allies have sent more than 2 million rounds of 155 ammunition to Ukraine and has also sent artillery to Israel. The chief weapons buyers for the army, Doordarshan, said supplemental funding would build artillery production facilities across many states. He added the funding will expand production lines, strengthen the American economy, and create new jobs. Also, as the Ukraine-Russia conflict drags on, EU officials are eyeing talks starting next year with Ukraine and Moldova. The European Union's executive will recommend the bloc open membership negotiations with Kyiv once it meets outstanding conditions on Wednesday. A senior Ukrainian government minister said Kyiv expected the EU to provide a positive appraisal of its progress on the path to membership in a report this week. In its 3 decades of independence, Ukraine has sought to forge its own path as a sovereign state while looking to align more closely with Western institutions, including the EU and NATO. Also, NATO allies condemned a decision by Russia on Tuesday to withdraw from the Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe, a key post-Cold War agreement, and said they would suspend its operation in response. Russia formally withdrew from the Security Treaty, which limited key categories of conventional armed forces, blaming the United States for undermining post-Cold War security with the enlargement of the NATO military alliance. The United States said it would suspend treaty obligations effective from December 7th. Russia suspended participation in the treaty in 2007 and halted active participation in 2015. And still to come on DD India News Hour. G7 foreign ministers' 2-day summit in Tokyo, situation in the Middle East to be the focal point. A unique competition in New York satiated hunger of millions. We tell you more ahead. A largest internally flawless fancy vivid blue diamond sold. To whom and how much? We tell you soon.
Welcome to Jaipur.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India News. I'm Lipakshi Khurana, and moving on. Group of 7 or G7 foreign ministers continue to discuss ways to revitalize peace efforts in the West Asia as they meet for the second and final day of the summit in Tokyo. Host Japan said in a statement that the subject was brought up during a working dinner late on Tuesday. The statement gave no details of options being discussed if the Hamas terrorist group is ousted from Gaza as a result of an ongoing Israeli bombardment of the Palestinian enclave. Meanwhile, the ministers also expected to mention the necessity of a humanitarian pause in the fighting in the Gaza Strip in their joint statement. Top diplomats of Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, the US and the EU are participating in the meeting. Also, Japanese Foreign Minister Yuo Kamikawa and German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock held bilateral talks on the sidelines of the Group of 7 foreign ministers meeting in Tokyo on Wednesday. The G7 wealthy nations, Britain, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan and the United States, as well as the European Union, were meeting in Tokyo. Issues like Russia's war in Ukraine and the Israel-Gaza crisis were discussed. And for more, we have our correspondent Chris Gilbert with us from Tokyo. Well, Chris, the G7 bloc of wealthy democracies risks eroding its relevance as a force to tackle major geopolitical crises over an apparent struggle between its member nations to agree on a firm, united approach to Israel's war in Gaza. Can you update us as to what all was discussed yesterday and what is the progress made?
Yeah, well, they've effectively said that, they are aiming for some kind of joint statement by the end of the summit on Wednesday. And there's not much controversy amongst them. It's far more simple for the G7 to get in line on that issue compared to pursuing their own very complicated individual relations with a country like China. But at the working dinner on Tuesday night, which was their first group session, that did conclude in a condemnation of Hamas for the surprise attack on October 7th. There was a call to release hostages and, of course, some discussion of humanitarian aid. You mentioned things that were and were not discussed. What was not discussed was the death toll which the UN put out yesterday in Palestine of 10,000 people. A great percentage of is believed to be civilians, journalists, UN workers and children. They also did not discuss the proportionality or legality of Israel's month of bombing of the Gaza Strip, targeting individual ambulances, hospitals, bakeries and refugee camps. Yet to be seen if those are going to be issues on the table for the rest of the talks on Wednesday. But certainly a pat on the back by the G7 and Japan included for Japan's, for example, $65 million of humanitarian aid that's going to Gaza.
Right. Chris, also, apart from the joint statement which is expected today, what are the other issues which can be discussed?
Yeah, it's very interesting. You know, if we were having this conversation a few months ago in April or even in May at the G7 Leaders Summit, the paramount issues of those discussions were China and Ukraine. The communique in May from the Leaders Summit had a 5-point plan of how the G7 countries were going to proceed with their own, as I say, individual complicated relations with China. And of course, Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian leader, attended that summit. Those issues are effectively footnotes, you know, at least in the material that has been provided by the foreign ministers so far in this summit. But of course, they are going to be important topics that are also being discussed, updates from these member countries and how they are working towards the broad group goals of the G7 to counter what they perceive as economic coercion by China and very blatant military assertiveness by China in the Indo-Pacific. The Philippines is going to be watching those discussions very closely in particular, and also what further efforts can be given to Ukraine. The G7 has expressed unwavering solidarity alongside Ukraine for the conflict in the east of that country against Russia. That came up in the bilateral talks between Japan and Germany on Wednesday morning. They will also be discussed throughout the group sessions today and will likely be included in the joint statement at the close of the meeting.
All right. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us and letting us know that update from there. And moving on, after attending G7 meet and other meetings in the West Asia to advance efforts to support a free and open Indo-Pacific region, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is visiting South Korea, with discussion most likely on deepening military relationship between Russia and North Korea. It's his first visit to South Korea since Yoon Suk-yeol became president last year. Here's Andrew Wood in Hong Kong reporting for more.
The United States, Japan and South Korea have already condemned North Korea for supplying arms and ammunition to Russia for use in Ukraine. South Korea itself is actually quite a big producer and exporter of armaments. So far, Seoul says that it doesn't want to supply arms to countries that are at war. So this might be an area where Mr. Blinken might want to try to change the South Korean president's mind. Because after all, more armaments for Ukraine would probably help the country to fight back against Russia. There's also the perennial issue of North Korea. Back in August, Mr. Blinken said that if Beijing did not help to try to denuclearize North Korea, then America would have to strengthen its alliance with Japan and South Korea. And it certainly seems to be doing that. It's done that over the past month or so. There's much more cooperation between these two US allies in, well, virtually in sharing information about North Korea and also about the possible threats from China as well. So this also might be some maneuvering as well before the big meeting next week that's expected between President Xi Jinping and President Joe Biden in San Francisco on the sidelines of the APEC Forum for Pacific Rim countries in San Francisco. In Hong Kong, I'm Andrew Wood, reporting for DD India.
And world leaders and heads of international organizations will gather in the French capital this week for the 6th edition of the Paris Peace Forum. It comes against a challenging backdrop of geopolitical tensions, which makes collective action all the more urgent. In the run-up to the main dialogue, which begins on Friday, the first World Summit on glaciers and poles will be held on Wednesday. Rebecca Bandhan reports from Paris.
The theme for this year's Paris Peace Forum is seeking common ground in a world of rivalry. The aim of the annual event is to discuss global challenges, drive coordination and political momentum, and ultimately promote good governance. With the forum taking place against the backdrop of the Israel-Hamas conflict and Russia's war in Ukraine, talks about peace and security seem all the more relevant. Experts say the event is an important opportunity for dialogue on urgent issues, but that expectations need to be managed in terms of what the Paris Peace Forum can achieve.
I don't think that it's going to achieve a huge political breakthrough on any of the crises that we are seeing today, but it is certainly a valuable forum, particularly for the connections between civil society and governments, as well as both civil society and governments and the private sector.
The list of speakers at the Peace Forum includes presidents and prime ministers, Nobel laureates and representatives from non-governmental organisations. French President Emmanuel Macron is part of the event, along with the head of the World Bank, Ajay Banga. Climate change is one of the global challenges that will come into sharp focus. Leading up to the main event, the Paris Peace Forum is hosting the One Planet Polar Summit, which it's billing as the first international summit dedicated to poles and glaciers. Researchers and scientists from over 40 countries will meet in Paris to share their findings, as they warn of an urgent need to act to protect these fragile environments. The North and South Poles are central to the planet's climate regulation, and the state of the world's glaciers has an effect on communities and sea levels. Other topics that will be discussed at the Paris Peace Forum include cybersecurity and risks that come with the rise of artificial intelligence. The forum comes as challenges only seem to be mounting globally. Rebecca Bundon in Paris reporting for DD India.
While shifting focus, U.S. Supreme Court mulls over upholding the legality of a federal law that criminalizes keeping guns under domestic violence restraining orders. The case in consideration involves Zaki Rahimi, a Texas man who pleaded guilty to illegally possessing guns in violation of the law. Around 250 people rallied outside the court, urging the justices to overturn the previous ruling. The justices showed a willingness to find a balance between U.S. Constitution's Second Amendment's right to keep and bearing of arms by applying a standard that would disarm people deemed dangerous.
I am also a part of the population and generation that has endured.
An analyst, while contemplating all angles of the issue, say a final ruling could provide a more balanced approach between a modern and historical law.
Supreme Court said that from now on, the constitutionality of modern gun laws should be determined not based on things like whether the laws, further their stated purposes, whether they save lives, whether they prevent terror, intimidation, and coercion, but rather based solely on whether they are consistent with historical tradition, which is a new test for the Second Amendment, and it's led to a lot of sort of disagreement and I think confusion in the lower courts. So the Solicitor General, I think, was very clear that when she uses the word responsible, she doesn't mean it in a colloquial sense about, is the person the kind of person who takes out the recycling once a week or whatever. This is about danger to others.
Moving on, Britain will not ban protests and rallies during Armistice weekend, informs a senior police official. Mark Rowley, head of London's Metropolitan Police Force, said that the police will ensure that remembrance events go ahead as normal. This comes a day after British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak urged organisers not to go ahead with any protest planned this weekend when Armistice Day will be marked. Keeping in mind the security concerns, authorities have asked organisers to postpone any demonstration plans over the weekend, including Saturday's anniversary of the end of World War I. Well, during a protest in Madrid, clashes erupted as thousands rallied against proposed amnesty for those involved in Catalonia's independence bid. Far-right demonstrators, some making fascist salutes, crashed with police. Amidst a peaceful gathering, a small group attempted to breach the police line near Socialist Party headquarters. The amnesty law, a part of negotiations between the Socialist Party and Catalan separatist parties, has sparked widespread opposition and demonstrations. And now let's take a look at other stories making news around the world. People fleeing to Chad have reported a fresh wave of ethically driven killings after the paramilitary rapid support forces took control of the main army base in Sudan's West Darfur. People have reported that RSF forces are targeting the army base and a camp for internally displaced people as fighting broke out in the nation between two warring sides in April and June this year. A fire in an informal immigrant neighborhood in the city of Coronel in southern Chile killed 14 Venezuelan migrants, including 8 children. The victims are believed to be undocumented Venezuelan immigrants who had recently arrived in the area. Officials are still confirming the victims' identities and determining the cause of the incident. This Thanksgiving season, a design competition is hoping to feed over 1 million hungry New Yorkers in a creative way. The challenge is to build giant sculptures out of unopened cans of food. 28 teams transformed 45,000 cans of tuna and salmon into enormous masterpieces like a Ninja Turtle, Winnie the Pooh, and giraffes. The largest internally flawless fancy vivid blue diamond ever put up for auction sold up for an astounding $43.8 million in Geneva on Tuesday. The vivid blue diamond, known as the Blue Royal and set in a ring, is among the rarest ever to be unearthed. The diamond is unique because of its rich blue color and its unmodified, pure, brilliant shape. And still to come on DD India News Hour. Donald Trump's daughter heads to Manhattan courthouse for fraud trial. India and Malaysia move forward together as foreign ministers from both sides discuss security and trade. And grand laser show in Ayodhya to mark Deepotsav celebrations ahead of Diwali.
Turning crisis into opportunity, transforming ideas into action, stories of real change, tales of sustainable solution.
This series is going to tell stories of such change makers.
Watch Change Makers on DD India.
Akshi Khurana, and time now for a quick recap of the headlines. Benjamin Netanyahu says Israeli forces operating inside Gaza City warns Lebanon's Hezbollah against escalating conflict. Uncertainty grips Bangladesh as another 48-hour nationwide blockade begins today, demanding fresh polls in the country. India to host annual bilateral 2+2 Ministerial Dialogue in New Delhi on November 9th and 10th. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin to attend. And in Cricket World Cup, Glenn Maxwell's Herculean double 100 seals Australia's 3-wicket win and his semi-final berth. Well, Donald Trump's daughter is due to testify in her father's fraud trial on Wednesday. Ivanka Trump is expected to appear in a Manhattan courthouse to give evidence in the civil case. The former president of the United States is accused of inflating his wealth to secure better loans from banks. He denies any wrongdoing, calling the trial politically motivated. Sally Patterson reports from New York for more.
Ivanka Trump is not a co-defendant in this civil fraud trial. She's instead listed as a witness in the case after her team successfully argued that claims against her were too old. But they couldn't get her out of the case completely. She's being brought to New York City to give evidence, just as her father, Donald Trump, and brothers have been forced to do over the past 2 weeks. The case is being brought by New York Attorney General Letitia James. She alleges the former president and his co-defendants committed repeated fraud by inflating assets to secure better loans and insurance policies. Now, Judge Arthur Engeron has already ruled Trump is liable for fraud. Now he, and he alone, as there's no jury in this case, is deciding how much Trump will have to pay in damages. The New York Attorney General also wants to cancel Trump's business licenses in her state, and that could see him lose control of his properties here. Trump has called the trial a scam, saying it's a ploy by his political opponents. During his own testimony on Monday, tensions were high, and the judge threatened to dismiss him from the witness stand. Now, even though Ivanka left the Trump Organization in 2017, prosecutors argue she remains financially and professionally intertwined with the company. Her lawyers dispute that, saying she's being needlessly forced to testify in order to harass her and her father. Sally Patterson in New York, reporting for DD India.
Well, the White House urged caution at polls showing President Joe Biden lagging behind leading Republican candidate Donald Trump. Biden trails Trump in 5 of the 6 most important battleground states a year before the election of 2024, according to the polls. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre briefed reporters in response to questions on several issues confronting the administration.
I'm not going to speak to anything related to 2024. And I also want to be very clear here, like we have to really take these polls with a grain of salt, as we should really be very mindful here. And one of the reasons why is just a year ago, right, back in 2022.
And 5 Republican presidential candidates will face each other on Wednesday in the party's third primary debate. Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, Chris Christie and Tim Scott have all qualified to appear, but the current frontrunner in the race, Donald Trump, has once again chosen not to take part. DD India's U.S. correspondent Kate Fisher reports from Washington.
2 of the 5 candidates who've made it to the debate stage in Miami are Indian American. But former US Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, and businessman Vivek Ramaswamy are still lower in the polls compared with frontrunner Donald Trump, and still behind his closest competitor, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. With GOP primary voting starting in January, so only a couple of months away, Trump's rivals are hanging on to viability by a thread. But the stakes at Wednesday's debate are particularly high for Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, who are in a cage match for second place behind Trump in Iowa, which is the first state to vote. Haley has enjoyed a significant, though not huge, burst of support in recent polling, in part thanks to previous debate performances. But another Indian American and her rival, Vivek Ramaswamy, is close behind her. His performance in the first debate saw him increase in the polls. DeSantis has struggled to maintain his early positioning as the major Republican alternative to Donald Trump, and he'll be trying to reignite that initial excitement. But the former president, who remains the frontrunner in the Republican primary, is skipping the debate, which is taking place less than 110 kilometers from his residence at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. Instead, he'll headline a rally in South Florida as counter-programming. He also missed the first 2 debates. Kate Fisher in Washington reporting for DD India.
Well, India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, and his Malaysian counterpart, Dr. Zambri Abdul Qadir, co-chaired the 6th India-Malaysia Joint Commission meeting in New Delhi on Tuesday. The Joint Commission meeting reviewed the progress on the security, trade and finance sectors, as well as maritime cooperation between the 2 countries. Both the sides also discussed the regional and multilateral issues of mutual interest. In a social media post, Dr. Jaishankar said the 6th Joint Commission meeting will take forward India and Malaysia's enhanced strategic partnership. An Indian Union Minister V. Muralidharan has reached Tokyo this morning, commencing his 3-day official visit to Japan. During his visit, Muralidharan will hold meetings with ministers, business leaders, academia and members of the Indian diaspora. He will also visit Kyoto, Hiroshima and Oita, besides Tokyo. At Ritsu-Miken Asia Pacific University, Oita is scheduled to deliver a lecture on India and the emerging world. India and Japan value a special strategic and global partnership based on ancient historical ties and shared values. Moving on, India and the United States will hold the 2+2 Ministerial Dialogue on November 9th and 10th in New Delhi. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd J. Austin and Secretary of State Antony Blinken are scheduled will meet India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and Defense Minister Rajnath Singh. The primary focus of these meetings will encompass critical issues, including strengthening in defense collaboration, exploring emerging technologies, addressing space-related matters, and adapting to the evolving global landscape. The leaders are also expected to discuss global and regional security issues, including the developing situation in the West East Asia due to this Israel-Hamas conflict. And the educational ties between India and Australia got further boost today after Australia opened the campuses of 2 of its prestigious universities in Gujarat in India. Australia's Education Minister Jason Clare and Indian Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan inaugurated the Deakin University and Wolon Wong University in Gift City, located in Gujarat.
Our 21st century is going to be the knowledge-based society. It should be a knowledge-based economy. So this kind of bridge between both the countries, between both the democracies, will certainly create a new ecosystem of knowledge and service-based economy.
While Australia's Education Minister Jason Clare said opening of campuses of these two universities will further deepen ties between the two countries.
This is a historic day. These are the first two international universities to be given approval to establish a campus in India, Wollongong University and Deakin University, and I hope that they are the first of a number. But the truth is that our relationship is long and strong. Australian universities and Indian universities have been working together for many decades, helping to educate people in both countries and doing lots of research as well. There are more than 450 agreements between our two universities to help to develop new knowledge. This is the next step in building a stronger, deeper relationship between our two countries.
Well, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party and like-minded other parties will enforce another round of 48-hour road, rail, waterway blockade across Bangladesh from today. The blockade is to mount pressure on the government to step down and hold the next election under a non-partisan administration. The BNP has said the blockade program will be observed from 6 a.m. on Wednesday to 6 a.m. Friday across Bangladesh. The fresh agitation was announced on the last day of the opposition's 48-hour nationwide blockade, which had been marked by widespread incidents of violence, including clashes with police and torching and vandalizing vehicles. And DD India's correspondent Namal Singh Parmar joins us from Dhaka for more. Well, Parmar, how is the Bangladesh government and its police and other forces responding to this renewed call for a 48-hour blockade by the opposition?
Yes, this is the third phase of blockade. Earlier, they declared two more blockade. One was for 3 days and another was for 2 days. So now government is also prepared to tackle such kind of situation on roads of Dhaka and other cities and other part of Bangladesh. So there is a heavy deployment of law enforcement agencies, police and rapid action battalions and the BGP, Border Guard Bangladesh. So due to the heavy presence of police and the law enforcement agencies, now people are also in a mood to wind up their day-to-day work, and they are fed up with such kind of obstacle to their daily life. So there is a less, it is visible that there is a less impact of this phase of blockade. But even though they are having a fear to go out and to do travel, long distance travel or intercity travels, but within city there is situation is quite under control. Yes.
Yeah, also, Parmar, as you told us about the impact this tussle between the opposition and the government is having on the ground for the people, the trouble the common man is facing, and do you see any solution approaching soon?
Yes, due to blockade and this kind of disruption, the normal life of people are impacted heavily. So people are thinking, or they are having a fear and tension in their mind. Though the schools were open, but there were a sparse presence of children as their parents fear about their safety. Government is not in a mood to bow down to the demands of the opposition. At the same time, BNP and like-minded other parties like Jamaat and the Islamic Andolan, they are consistently they are creating pressure on the government to for the step down. And there are no sign of dialogue still now between the opposition as well as the ruling party. So this type of situation may continue further in Bangladesh. Yeah.
All right, Parmar, thank you so much for that update from there. And moving on back home ahead of Diwali, there is no respite for residents in India's capital as the air quality in Delhi continued to remain in the severe category on Wednesday, as per the Central Pollution Control Board. The Delhi government has also decided to implement the odd-even road rationing scheme to control the vehicular movement on roads. In the wake of the worsening air quality in Delhi National Capital Region, the Supreme Court on Tuesday sternly directed the governments of Punjab, Rajasthan and Haryana to take immediate steps to stop stubble burning by farmers in the state, which the court said was one of the major contributors to air pollution. And for more, we have our correspondent Siddharth Bharadwaj joining us. Well, Siddharth, Delhi has been engulfed in an acrid smoke since past week almost. What's the situation today amid ban on BS3 petrol and BS4 diesel vehicle also, which continues?
Well, certainly, Lipakshi, the masks are on, but this time around the reason is quite different. It is the deteriorating air quality in Delhi, which has impacted almost everyone who's out there on the road, especially the senior citizens and children. And it is causing some respiratory illnesses and also some cardiovascular illnesses amongst these people. While I'm standing here in central Delhi, and while we were coming here, we could just see the long queues outside hospitals, people who are impacted by this toxic smog which has engulfed the national capital. And behind me you can see the building which is hardly visible, and you can see, I would like to request my camera person to pan here, and you can see that building, and you can see the smog which has engulfed and blanketed Delhi. The normal AQI level, Lipakshi, is below 50, and in some major parts of Delhi, the AQI were recorded above 400, somewhere 500 as well, 600, 700. It goes on to show that what is the level of air quality in Delhi right now.
Well, Siddharth, also GRAP 4 has been implemented by the government. Can you explain that to our viewers?
Well, certainly, Lipakshi. GRAP Stage 4 has been immediately implemented by the government, and in which there are a set of regulations, there are a set of rules and restrictions that have been imposed in Delhi to actually control this deteriorating air quality, which also includes the restriction of diesel trucks on Delhi until and unless they are carrying essentials. Also, the trucks who are having LNG, CNG and electric trucks, they are allowed. Also, the construction work has been halted in the national capital amid the deteriorating air quality. The AQI rising above 500, 600, 400. That, like I said, goes on to show that what is the level of air quality in Delhi. Also, the students are advised to stay home. And the work from the in-person classes have been temporarily halted by the government, except class 10th and 12th, because they have their board examinations. They have to prepare for the examinations. Otherwise, all the classes, all the students, they are right now attending the online classes. Also, the central government employees have been asked to work from home. The central government is asking those employees to work from home, and all this is being done, Lipakshi, to control this poor air quality which is impacting each and everyone who's out there on road, especially the senior citizen. Now children are also getting infected. So the situation is very alarming right now in Delhi, and we don't know yet when the solution will come for this particular thing.
All right, Siddharth, let's hope we see the solution soon. Thank you so much for joining us. And moving on, let's take a look at other stories making news today. The acid attack victims in the northern state of India, Odisha, staged a protest in Bhubaneswar, holding placards. The victims, along with social activists, silently held a demonstration at Lower PMG Square in Bhubaneswar, demanding justice and spreading awareness to stop acid attacks. The government of Uttar Pradesh has allotted 165 acres of land for a 40-megawatt photovoltaic station in Ayodhya. The cost of the entire project is estimated to be worth 160 crore rupees. The project aims at generating 70 million units of green energy. Ahead of Diwali, a grand laser show featuring colourful lights added grandeur to the Deepotsav celebrations in the northern state of India, Uttar Pradesh's Ayodhya. The laser lights showed different colours flashing across the night sky, mesmerising the audience. And still to come on DD India News Hour. Oil prices fall as markets remain hopeful of Federal Reserve keeping its interest rates unchanged this time too. US President Joe Biden will meet with United Auto Workers President and union workers to highlight the recent agreement between UAW and automakers. And defending champions England will lock horns with the Netherlands in Cricket World Cup to restore their pride.
Turning crisis into opportunity, transforming ideas into action, stories of real change, tales of sustainable solution.
This series is going to tell stories of such change makers.
Watch Change Makers on DD India.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India News. I'm Lepakshi Khurana, and on to business news now. U.S. stocks ended Tuesday's trading session in positive territory after a strong day for technology stocks. The S&P and NASDAQ indexes are now on the longest hot streak since in 2 years. William Dancelor reports from New York.
The S&P 500 has now closed up in the past 7 trading sessions, with the NASDAQ closing up in its past 8. That marks the longest winning run for them since November 2021. As well as tech stocks, a drop in oil prices gave the markets a boost on Tuesday. The US benchmark has fallen below $80 per barrel, its lowest level seen since August. The Dow Jones closed the day up 0.2%, the S&P 0.3%, with the tech-heavy NASDAQ closing the day up 0.9%. A number of Federal Reserve members are slated to speak this week. A focus will be on whether the central bank has finished raising interest rates and when the first round of rate cuts will begin. And in company news, Uber closed the day up over 3.5% after quarterly earnings beat analysts' expectations. William Denslow in New York, reporting for DD India.
And oil prices fell more than 4% on Tuesday to the lowest since late July. Rising OPEC exports eased fears about tight markets, and strengthening of dollar came to rescue of rising oil prices. Brent crude futures closed below $84 a barrel for the first time since Hamas Islamist October 7th attack on Israel. For now, traders remain on high alert for signs of a wider conflict emerging in the region that could disrupt supplies. Meanwhile, markets will look for more clarity on the Fed's intentions from officials speaking later in the week. Markets are optimistic that the Federal Reserve might put an end to its rate hikes. Those expected to speak includes Chair Jerome Powell and voting members such as New York Fed Chief John Williams and Dallas Fed President Lori Logan. At the November 1st meeting, the Federal Reserve announced its intention to keep the overnight interest rate unchanged. Powell said the central bank was watching data closely. Also, U.S. President Joe Biden will meet with United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain. The meeting focuses mainly on the decision of Chrysler parent Stellantis to reopen a shuttered assembly plant in Belvidere, Illinois. Recently, Stellantis had agreed to build a new $3.2 billion battery plant and invest $1.5 billion in a new mid-sized truck factory in Illinois under its tentative labor agreement. This will add 5,000 total U.S. jobs by 2028, according to UAW. The labor deals with the Detroit 3 automakers, including a 25% pay hike, better retirement benefits, and other significant improvements through April 2028, though it is yet to be ratified. And on to some sports news now. Glenn Maxwell single-handedly guided Australia to an improbable 3-wicket win over Afghanistan in a World Cup match on Tuesday. Maxwell fought through cramps to smash an unbeaten 201 off 128 balls, sealing the team's spot in the semi-finals. They became the 3rd team to reach the semi-finals, with India and South Africa having already booked their spots. Afghanistan's loss has also kept hopes of Pakistan qualifying for the semi-final alive. Well, 2019 champions England, who are out of the World Cup, will now set sights on restoring their pride and secure a berth in the 2025 Champions Trophy when they face a plucky Netherlands in the World Cup in Pune on Wednesday. England have cut a sorry figure, managing just 1 win from 7 matches to slip to the bottom of the 10-team table, while Netherlands are on 9th place with 2 wins and 4 points. England suffered 33-run loss to arch rivals Australia on Saturday. Their campaign overall has been a horror, suffering defeats from all the teams except Bangladesh. Well, that's all for this edition of DD India News Hour. But let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter, and Instagram. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Nipakshi Khurana from all of us here in Delhi. Thanks for watching DD India News Hour.